Beyond the Bookshelf, Imprisoned Minds, Lost Boys, Trapped Men, and Solutions from Within the Prison by Erik S. Maloney and Kevin Wright. ASU Library welcomes and encourages open discussions. We ask that you listen and share with an open mind and respect privacy and boundaries. Please submit your questions using the Q&A. If time allows, the questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation or submitted to the authors. Thank you for coming, and I will now pass the presentation to Chad Dietz, who will share our Indigenous Land Statement and introduce the panelists.
Thank you so much, Patty. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Chad Dietz, ASU Library's metadata librarian for specialized collections. I am happy to open this Beyond the Bookshelf event with our ASU Library Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. The ASU Library acknowledges the 23 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located in the Salt River Valley on ancestral territories of Indigenous peoples, including the Akimel-Otham and Peeposh Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allows us to be here today. ASU Library acknowledges the sovereignty of these nations and seeks to foster an environment of success and possibility for Native American students and patrons. We are advocates for the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge systems and research methodologies within contemporary library practice. ASU Library welcomes members of the Akimel-Otham and Peeposh and all Native nations to the library. I also have the pleasure of introducing our panel today for Beyond the Bookshelf, featuring authors Erik Maloney and Kevin Wright. Erik and Kevin will be in conversation with Shannon Nickel, the Behavioral and Social Science Librarian at ASU. Additional Beyond the Bookshelf committee members include myself, Joyce Martin, Marilyn Murphy, Matt Ogborn, Patty Odell, and Samantha Pasco. The committee members will assist with the audience Q&A session following our talk this afternoon. Erik Maloney has dedicated his life to advocating for a trauma-focused approach to rehabilitation in prisons and bringing attention to the harms of mass incarceration through his writing and work as a co-founder of the Arizona Transformation Project. Erik is the co-author of Imprisoned Minds, Lost Boys, Trapped Men, and Solutions from Within the Prison. He developed and teaches a class based upon his book, which focuses on helping those who are incarcerated with him to overcome the irrational mindset or imprisoned mind that develops in response to childhood trauma. Dr. Kevin Wright is an associate professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice and director of the Center for Correctional Solutions at Arizona State University. His work focuses on enhancing the lives of people living and working in the correctional system through research, education, and community engagement. Dr. Wright developed and taught the first Inside Out Prison Exchange Program class in the state of Arizona and is a co-founder of the Arizona Transformation Project, a learning community of faculty, students, and people who are incarcerated. Shannon Nickel is an assistant librarian in the Social Sciences Division at Arizona State University Library. Her research areas include evidence-based decision-making, information literacy instruction, access to information as a human right, and academic library impact and value. Thank you all so much for being here, and take it away, Shannon.
Hi, yes, thanks so much for both of you being here. We'll go ahead and get started because we have so many questions and short time. Erik, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
And could you define your concept of the imprisoned mind for us?
Well, first, let me say thank you for having me. The imprisoned mind is a trauma-driven mindset that forms long before a person ever enters prison. It's an irrational mindset that's shaped by untreated childhood trauma, emotional neglect, and survival-based decision-making. It causes people to confuse wants with needs, react instead of reflect, and justify harmful behavior because it feels normal or necessary.
Could you share a specific story? And I believe we said this in the introduction, but you tell first-person stories about yourself and several other prisoners. Is there a specific story in the book where the imprisoned mind concept really stands out to you?
Well, all the stories share that, but one example is the story of a man who believed loyalty meant committing violence for people who never truly cared about him.
Mhm.
He wasn't trying to be a criminal. He was trying to protect the only family he thought he had. You see, that's the imprisoned mind, trauma disguised as logic.
I love that. The stories in the book, again, are very personal, and you're sharing not only your own personal story, but those of others. And what's the challenging part of that for you as a writer?
Well, for me, the hardest part was reliving the moments where we hurt people we cared about. Writing the stories forced us to confront the truth without excuses, not just what happened to us, but what we did to others. That level of honesty is painful, but it's also where growth begins.
Absolutely. In the very beginning of the book, you share a moment of realization that you describe as having deceived yourself about what it meant to be a man.
Yeah.
What does being a man to you now look like, and how does that differ from when you were just 21 years old?
Well, at 21, I thought being a man meant being tough, being feared, and being in control. Today, being a man means being accountable, emotionally honest, and responsible for the impact I have on others. You see, I realized that strength isn't about dominance, it's about integrity.
I think most men listening or reading your book probably also see themselves as men without giving it a lot of thought, just as you did at 21. Can you share something that you would want them to examine now, listening, and how they view themselves?
Well, I'd ask them to examine whether their identity is built on survival or values. Many men mistake trauma responses for personality traits. If you remove the pain, ask yourself, who are you really?
Of all of the stories you tell, which one do you feel carries the heaviest lesson as it relates to manhood? That's a very strong underlying component of your book, I feel, and honestly, a really relevant topic for today. So the lesson of manhood, but also how you hope that readers are receiving it when they read your book.
Yeah, like you said, each chapter actually touches upon it. But the story of a man who spent his entire life trying to prove he wasn't weak stands out to me. His entire identity was built on avoiding vulnerability, and it cost him everything. I hope readers see that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the doorway to becoming whole.
You've said that you share these stories to prevent young people from developing this mindset. For anyone who might be listening who is feeling stuck or lost in their own life, what advice would you give to them?
I tell them, like I tell everyone in my class, you're not broken. You're carrying unprocessed pain. The moment you stop running from your story and start understanding that, you take back control. You don't have to fix everything at once. Just start with honesty.
Who did you intend for the audience to be when you were writing this book, and has the readership surprised you in any way, from a group of librarians?
I mean, yeah, it surprised me, but honestly, I didn't know the audience at first. I
Right.
just knew people needed to understand that no one wakes up and decides to be a criminal. I wanted readers to ask what happened to this person instead of just judging them solely based upon their conviction. The goal was to restore humanity where society often removes it. And to answer your other question, yeah, I've been really surprised and honored by just the range that the book, the age range of the people the book actually touches. I've had the book touch teenagers all the way up to women in their 70s, and that's just beautiful to me.
Love it. Dr. Wright mentions you plan to extend the imprisoned mind idea, or maybe you even started into a class or workshop that others in prison, so that others in prison may free their mind. Would you tell us more about it? And if anyone here listening would like to support your work, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, thank you. And yeah, that's one of my most proudest accomplishments. I'm proud to say that I'm about to start my 13th cycle of my class. I just recently graduated over 100 people, and that was groundbreaking and a very proud moment for me. But yeah, the goal is to teach people in prison how to understand their trauma, challenge their thinking, and rebuild their identity. You see, the class focuses on introspection, emotional intelligence, accountability, and purpose. Support can come through funding, curriculum development, research partnerships, or simply helping bring the program to more facilities.
What do you hope, you're in the ASU audience here. What do you hope if other scholars and researchers are listening? What do you want them to take away from the stories that they can't get from traditional empirical study type
Yeah.
research?
Well, the first thing that I'd say is traditional studies give data. These stories give context. They show the emotional logic behind harmful decisions, the why that statistics can't capture. I hope scholars see that lived experience is not anecdotal, it's essential.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you that you want to share with everyone?
Yeah, you haven't asked me about redemption.
Tell us.
Redemption is real. People can change when they're given the tools, the space, and the belief that they're worth changing. No one is the worst thing that they've ever done.
Great. Dr. Wright, if you don't mind, I'll take a couple of minutes to ask you some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as an academic, this collaboration is a little unique. And what ways did it challenge your traditional research norms?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first off, thanks AC Libraries for setting this up and taking a chance on a creative and unique way of presenting a book. And so thank you for having us. Erik, thanks for always doing these things, man. Good to be with you, no matter what the setting is. And appreciate everybody that's tuned in today. And you let Erik off easy. I mean, we're coming back to him, I know for sure. Get him off script a little bit.
We have more
Where
questions,
he's
but
his
we're
best. So I'm excited about that. But so yeah, your question about the typical way we do research and how this challenged it or what was different, everything. I mean, literally everything about it. And at the most basic core level, I know Erik well, and so we're comfortable with one another. I would be studying Erik in the more traditional way. I mean, that's really what it would be. I would be studying Erik as opposed to working alongside him, collaborating with him, creating this vision alongside him, and writing together. And I would read all the literature that's out there. I would come up with research questions. I would go through our institutional review board. We would post flyers around the yard. I would try to recruit people. I'd show up. I'd hope to gain rapport from them. I'd ask these questions. I'd never know if they were telling me the truth or not. I'd go back, I'd take the stories, I'd write them up. I'd probably never see them again. Like literally everything is different. How we did this work, which was led by Erik and started with his idea, started with his conversations that he had on the inside, and basically turned everything on its head. And to the last question that you just asked him, and some things that I've learned along the way is we need this voice. Like there's a lot of conversations and discussions right now about who owns the knowledge and who owns people's stories and things like that. The traditional way is that for some reason, I'm the expert on that. I'm the expert on incarceration because I've gone through graduate school. I've got a master's degree, a PhD degree, and I know research methods and all this kind of stuff. And I'm the expert. I've never spent a night incarcerated, and certainly not many nights in them. So nothing about this was traditional. I don't know where you want me to take that question, Shannon, because we can go in many different directions, and Erik can chime in too. But everything about it was creative and innovative, and I'm so thankful to have that opportunity to work alongside Erik rather than just to study Erik.
okay. Well, I'm going to go off our script here then. Erik, what did it mean to you to have a partner like Dr. Wright who wanted to get involved in this project with you?
It meant the world to me. I spoke about it in the latter parts of the book, but Dr. Wright wasn't just a partner, he was confidence, right? He gave me the confidence that I could actually do this and it was going to amount to something. Without him, I could have done the work, right? But who knows what would have happened to it. I've come up with ideas and I've spent countless days and nights formulating ideas and they just never went anywhere because I didn't have someone who believed in me and someone who was willing to put themselves in it or invest themselves into it in order to make it a reality. And that's what Dr. Wright is.
Love it. Dr. Wright, in the book, you raised some questions about the phrase mass incarceration, suggesting it reduces people into a statistic, or as Erik mentioned before, the worst thing that ever happened to them. As a criminology researcher, would you help listeners understand the scope of the U.S. prison system and its population?
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of the scope and thinking about the mass and the number side of it, we're based in Arizona. So in Arizona, we have about 34,000 people who are incarcerated in our state facilities. But again, I know people joining us outside of Arizona. Nationwide, I think it's somewhere around 2 million people that are incarcerated in either a prison or jail. When you extend that to the community corrections population, and so people that are on probation or parole and still under supervision, that's about double. And so that's another 4 million or so. And so you're talking about 6 million or so that are under correctional supervision of some form at any one time. And that's per year. And so year after year, as people release, you start to get into the tens of millions of people that have actually experienced some form of correctional supervision. So that's the number side. But then when you think about the actual people that are typically in our jails and prisons, it's high rates of substance abuse, significant challenges with mental well-being, overrepresentation of racial and ethnic minorities, lower education levels, really all these failed systems that we might have on the outside, whether it's educational system or employment system, housing, health, whatever it might be. The people that haven't gotten that support they need often end up in jails and prisons in a lot of the route that Erik lays out in his book. But in bringing that up and talking about mass incarceration and people just using that big group and making it about statistics and how big it is, then we just talk about the group. We forget about the people that make up that group. And it's very easy to just talk about it like it's some abstract thing as opposed to it being human beings. And I've been at Arizona State University for 15 years now. And in 2010, I would ask my students in class of 80 or so, I'd say, hey, raise your hand if you have a family member or somebody that's very close to you who's experienced incarceration. And back in 2010, I'd get maybe a quarter of the class, maybe 20% of the class, every fifth student or so would like sheepishly raise their hand. I do that now in 2025. It's more than half the class that the hands go right up. And so like this, it's no longer just like an us and them and people in prison are different, which I know we'll probably talk about today. Like it touches everybody in various ways. And the last point I'll make on that we were trying to make clear in the book through these stories is if you start thinking about the humans and the people and the human beings, you might ask for something different of the correctional system. And so if your brother were to be incarcerated and you love your brother, and we'd ask you, what do you want for your brother? People would probably say things like, I want him to get help, or I want him to get supported, or I want him to be better than he is now, whatever it might be. And that could be the approach that we take, right? Everybody in there is probably somebody's brother or son or whatever. So the point there was, again, we love talking about mass incarceration in this country, the big numbers and everything like that. And I think it gets us away from the actual human beings like Erik and others on the inside and the lives they've lived prior to that.
So to that point, rehabilitation rather than punishment, those two terms, some people disagree with the concept of rehabilitation to some extent. In prison, it's supposed to be punishment. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that rehabilitation is always there somewhere. And as I understand it, our penitentiaries in America were founded basically on reform in rehabilitation. The idea that you can take people away from society, give them support, give them work, give them religion at that time, whatever it might be, and then return them better than when they left. And I think there's been various components to that over time where we still have it in our system, but it's probably not a priority. And very quickly, those mass numbers and the sheer number of people that are incarcerated makes it difficult to do that individualized treatment and support for people to be better. But in terms of if people were to say they don't deserve rehabilitation or our prisons should not be about rehabilitation, by now most people know that just about everybody who goes to prison is coming back. Like a high percentage of people are actually returning to our communities. And so if there are things that we can be doing to make them return better, healthier, make our communities safer, I'd like to think that we would do that. It's almost foolish otherwise to, over punish people while they're in the inside, have them return worse, and then express dismay if recidivism rates are high or people are being victimized or there's repeat offending or something like that when we didn't do anything about it in the first place. And so, I understand why people might want a very harsh, punitive prison system, but we don't have a lot of evidence that that's going to make us any safer or better off as a society.
One thing that brought this book to my attention is the idea of citational justice. And as academic librarians, we often talk about diversifying your bibliography when you're looking at things, and people tend to go into journals that they are popular or people that they know rather than people in the actual communities of which they serve. As you've addressed, your book provides a platform for voices who seldom get included in academic discourse. As a scholar and professor, how do you consciously approach citation as a choice?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I think about this, I think about really steps earlier, like upstream, and really, as I alluded to earlier, like the production of knowledge and who actually is putting the information out there before even like how do we cite. And we made a conscious choice really 10 years ago now to include people on the inside and in the work that we do. So I've known Erik for 10 years now, taught him as a student originally. And we've been part of a group called the Arizona Transformation Project that does work on the inside. But we're collaborators in every aspect of it. And it's starting to become more emphasized that we should be doing that. The phrase lived experience has been huge in the last few years. We just did it because it made sense to us. And to give you a very quick anecdote, which I think illustrates your point perfectly, prior to doing this work, we did some research on visitation in prison and specifically recidivism. And so throughout prisons in Arizona, we went in and we talked to people about their visitation experiences and who comes to talk to you. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What do you talk about? And then we linked that up with recidivism data later. So when people were released from prison, were they more likely to come back or not? It was a big National Science Foundation funded project. We followed all the traditional scientific method. We collected our data, we analyzed our data, and we started to see a link where certain types of visits were associated with lower recidivism. And specifically, if you were having a supportive visit where you were talking about the future, you were answering questions to one another, and really just using it as a productive time, seemed to be a linked with reduced recidivism or the likelihood of recidivating. So we got excited about that on the academic side. And we're like, look, we can be evidence-based visitation people. We can create programs where we have people on the inside talk to their family members and answer these specific questions. And we can structure visitation so that it's a positive thing and make sure people don't come back to prison. And I went in and I took it to Erik and some other guys, and they were like, please don't do this. Like, don't go forward with this. Like, please don't push evidence-based visitation. And I was like, why? Like, we have the data. We think we see something here. We followed all the academic norms, as you said earlier. And they were like, that's the one place where we don't feel like we're incarcerated. That's the one place where we feel like human beings, where we can just talk with our family members and feel like we're a part of their family, the last thing that we want is for it to turn into a program where we're told the questions to ask and answer. And we started getting the feeling like visits wouldn't happen and like family members wouldn't come to visit if we did this. So like this pure academic route where we thought we did everything right and we're doing good probably was going to do harm if we didn't include the voices of people on the inside in doing that. And ever since that moment, I'm like, where are these other spots that we think we're doing good and doing good research, but maybe we're unintentionally producing harm? And so why not include the people from the get-go in it? So it's a roundabout way to just say there's immense value in bringing in that experience that I don't have as an academic, of experiencing incarceration, being around people who live and work in prison as a complement to the work that we do. And so I would like to see more opportunities for different voices, marginalized voices at the beginning of the process, rather than like, let's reach out into other outlets that we don't usually get in and make sure that we're citing those. And last point on this is that we decided to go a university press route. And that was important to me because I wanted it to be in these conversations. I wanted it to be used in classes, but it certainly made a challenging route. And part of the reason that this was a 8-year project together was several of those years languished in printing presses that didn't want to take a chance on this for whatever reason. And I can guess what some of the reasons were, but it was important to get that voice in there and to have a university press book that is authored by somebody currently incarcerated in Erik Maloney.
Mm. Well, we're honored to help you share this. I skipped one. I'm going to go back a little bit. The book advocates for trauma-informed prison systems. What does this look like in practice, and why would this be an effective and an important change?
Yeah, I'll answer quickly, and I hope we can throw to Erik too to get his thoughts on this, because I think he'd have good ideas. And on the one hand, you can say, look, there's a lot of trainings out there for trauma-informed practice. We can have staff go through those. We can equip staff so they're trauma-informed. But I honestly think that's asking a lot of staff to be able to do that, of correctional staff to be fully trauma aware, trauma informed, and carrying that with them in every aspect of their work. And so I want to start simple and start earlier in the line. And that's basically just hopefully getting people to know and have an awareness that people's lives before prison matter. That's it, like broadly defined. Like I think the way we approach it now is they come into contact with the system. You put an orange uniform on them. Again, they all became the same incarcerated person. We forget that they had histories that led them into this place. And so I want there to be more of an awareness and acceptance of knowing the people before and some of the things that they've been through, which of course would lead into trauma and ACEs and things like that. But a quick example of thinking about this, as a correctional staff member or treatment provider, you might experience somebody on the inside who is resistant to you, is maybe even, making it difficult for you, getting in your face, whatever it might be. And you might take that personally and say, this person doesn't want to take this class, they don't belong here, whatever it might be. But it very well may be they've had experiences earlier in their life with medicine, with treatment, with authority that have, affected their thinking to the point today where they're carrying that with them and they're possibly triggered by it and they're hitting it right there. And that's how they're interacting with you. And so it's not something to take personal, but rather better understand. So I want to start simple with trauma-informed correctional system in particular, and just allow an awareness that life prior to incarceration matters, and it's useful to understand what that might look like. But again, I know Erik's got great ideas on this too, so I'd love to hear his perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, I just think it's a missed opportunity not to utilize a segment of the prison population to work alongside the correctional staff in order to help do that. In a lot of ways, that there are a lot of people like myself who crave knowledge. They crave empowerment and autonomy in here. And more than that, they want to redeem themselves. And so it would be a missed opportunity to not train this segment of the imprisoned population up and help and have them work alongside staff in order to provide a more trauma-focused approach to a practical rehabilitation during incarceration. And that means teaching my Conquering Imprisoned Minds class, and other guys developing their own classes, expand the peer mentor programs, but it's a missed opportunity to not utilize long-term incarcerated people for that.
If I, Shannon, if I could just add on that really quickly, I wish everybody on this call could have the opportunity to sit in on Erik's class. It's really an art form. Watching him work with the men in there, and I've seen guys reduced to tears. I've seen Erik be able to pull the best out of guys. And so it's exactly what he's talking. I mean, he's trauma informed. His class is a trauma informed class. It's 100% trauma informed. But he has that language and that awareness and experiencing it himself that he can speak in ways that a staff member, that myself, that a treatment provider probably can't. And it's just an incredible experience to watch it happen. So I just wanted to back that up, that I've seen it in practice and I've seen him do it.
Love that. It reminds me a certain part of the book where you talk about we want them to learn how to make better decisions, but we send them to prison where all of their decisions are removed and they have no ability to practice that.
Yeah.
Dr. Wright, you've recently launched the DASH program, a peer-led well-being coaching initiative inside prison that reimagines correctional success around human growth, agency, and measurable well-being. Can you tell us more about that program?
Absolutely. And Erik's a full part of that too. And so he's been part of the team that's co-designed this thing. We've been working on it for really the last year and a half or so, but it's probably years before that of even, thinking about what this could look like. And in the Center for Correctional Solutions, we just believe corrections could be oriented towards making people better than their arrival to the system. And we think that everybody should want that, no matter what your political background is. It's hard to argue against the point of, do you want people to leave prison better than when they entered prison? And when I say better, I mean healthier, I mean more employable, better relationships with their family, better relationships with their community. It's hard to argue against that and say, no, I want them to be worse, or I want them to be the same. And yet, in my opinion, that's often the case of what we're doing. And so if we start focusing on making people better than their arrival, we still have to measure that and understand where people are at and understand if the programs and opportunities that we're providing to people are in fact making them better than their arrival. And so Erik and I and a bunch of guys there and some other people here at ASU have been working on this the last several years, in partnership with some of our correctional partners. And we basically created this understanding of where your well-being is. And so we have different dimensions of well-being that focus on different aspects of people's life. And so their family, their economic well-being, their mental health, their physical health. And we've created a series of questions that actually guys will complete on a laptop in prison. And they'll go through and they'll answer questions. So for example, their social well-being, they'll answer, to what extent do you have people in your life that you can count on for support? We also asked them, like, how important is social well-being for you? And would you like to get better at social well-being? Erik and his team will guide guys through this. And so they'll actually be there with them as they're filling this out on a laptop. And something that's very, very different than the usual research approach is once they've completed this, they get a printout immediately that says, here's where you fall on all these things in your own words, in your own idea. Here's where you might want to get better. Here's some opportunities for you. And we hand that to them. Again, traditional research, we ask a bunch of questions, we take data, and then we leave, and then we start publishing and we do things out here. So we literally give that to them. And then we also extend an opportunity to have one-on-one coaching from people like Erik on the inside for these things that they want to get better at. And so we give them a sense of here's where you're at and the things where you might want to be getting better at. And here's a pathway for actually doing that so that you're serving your time productively. Ideally, you are better than a rival. And most importantly to me, it's empowering the people for their own change. And, people on this call, the general public, we so often say people have to want to change, whether it's addiction, whether it's problematic behavior. We throw our hands up and we say, look, it's on them. People have to want to change. And yet it's always us expecting them to change. Do this, do that, take this program, take that, or whatever. What would it look like if instead we said, what's important to you? What would you like to get better at? And how can we make that happen for you? So I'm really excited about the Dash. We just launched it a couple weeks ago and started to get people involved with it. I see Matt Moore on the call here today, who's been a very important partner for us in getting this out, and a lot of other people. So there's many people behind this, including Erik. Sorry to keep throwing to you, and I don't want to get you too off track, Shannon, but any thoughts that you want to add? I mean, it's been a long road on this Dash, and just getting ready to launch it.
Well, just to piggyback off of what I said in the last answer, it's about empowering the guys who are incarcerated and giving them the autonomy to choose which direction they want to go. And then if they choose, partnering them with somebody who's also incarcerated with the lived experience, who's been trained in things like motivational interviewing, adverse childhood experiences, behavioral habits, that can help guide them through this process in the direction that they want to go.
Great. There's a part that I left out of the definition of the dash. It's named for the space between birth and death on a tombstone. The dash that represents the life we build between those two dates. Love that. You also discussed, and I think we've already mentioned, the Arizona Transformation Project, Inside Out Prison Exchange Program. Is there something you want to share with us for those, since we have an audience here? How do they improve outcomes and pathways for those imprisoned?
Yeah, so great questions. And if you haven't read the book or don't know, I first met Erik when he was a student in the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program back in 2016 here in Arizona. That program was started back east by Lori Pompa and her colleagues at Temple University in 1997, and it has since grown to 49 different states, 15 different countries. 65,000 students have taken an Inside Out class. And Inside Out, at its core, it brings university students into the prison to learn alongside incarcerated students. And so that's how I met Erik. He was an incarcerated student in our first Inside Out class back in 2016. And I just knew, I mean, as an educator, you come across students that you don't want class to be over because they bring such insight, such wisdom, and you want to keep working with them. And on the outside, we have opportunities to encourage people to go into graduate school or take other classes with us. On the inside, I didn't necessarily have that. And so as we were approaching the end, I'm like, I don't want to stop working with Erik. Like, he's got so much to offer. I've learned so much from him in this class. How do we keep this going? And so we created something that we call the Arizona Transformation Project. I see Justin on the call too, Erik, who's another co-founding member of that, who's now with us on the outside. And so very cool to see him. But the Arizona Transformation Project is incarcerated men, ASU faculty, ASU graduate students working together to enhance the system. And so we've been able to do a number of different research projects where we're all collaborators together. And in terms of, how do these make an impact? We're not here right now if not for Inside Out. The book doesn't happen if not for Inside Out. We're now 10 years in. This is our 10th year anniversary. And the students are reading Imprisoned Minds in Inside Out. It gives me chills every time I think about it, that this book that started out of that very first class, students are now literally reading in that class. And it's happening right now at the Red Rock Correctional Center down in Eloy, where Erik is incarcerated. And so Erik got to join last week as we led an activity together around the book for Inside Out students. So awesome full circle moment to now have the book that students be written by a former student of the class. But we love these programs. Again, it's about empowering people for better lives. And just about everything we do, and I hope really this book too, it applies to everybody, whether you're incarcerated or not. I think that's the biggest thing that I would emphasize for our approach, is that it's about human beings. It's not about incarcerated human beings. And so when Erik says we just crave autonomy and opportunity, it's the same things we crave on the outside. So I hope we can do that through those groups.
Not to put you on the spot, Erik, but did you want to add to that at all?
Well, to piggyback on that, the reason why this book can relate to everyone is because everyone has experienced trauma at some form of fashion in their childhood. Childhood is about experiences, and when we don't have experiences, oftentimes we encounter a physical injury or emotional shock that we don't know how to actually process. And so in reading this book, people can relate to that. No matter what age, ethnicity, background, it doesn't matter. And I think the stories are the raw and visceral truth that anyone can see in their own life.
We are about 20 minutes out from the end. I'm going to open it up to my colleague, Matt Ogborn, to see if we're at the end, Patty, of the questions we had assigned. So I think if we go ahead and go in, we have some additional questions and we're always ready to throw those at you. But we thought we'd open it up to the audience to see if they have any that they'd like to ask.
Hi, Shannon. So we do have some questions. I was just having some weirdness with my picture, so I muted that. We have some questions. I'll start here. First of all, we have one for you, Erik, and this covers some of the things that you've already talked about, but there's some stuff that you might be able to talk about that you haven't as well. So I'll read this first. Uh, Erik, thank you for taking the time to be here with us to share your lived experiences. Know that you and members of your community are seen, heard, and valued for what you have brought to our lives through your stories. Can you please share with us the impetus for writing this book, what it was like working alongside Kevin, and what were areas that were challenging and those that gave you hope?
So the question was, what is the impetus for writing the book?
Yes, that was the first part of it. So that would be great if you wanted to address that.
You know, coming to prison, people like to share their stories in prison. And when I first came to prison, I began to listen to people's stories and realize or recognize that their stories were not different than mine. And much of my life has been marred by trauma. And I began to recognize that many of our similar stories led to a behavior or the irrational mindset that influenced our behavior and our flawed decision making that caused us to be incarcerated. When you listen or when you read trauma or psychology books, they talk about an irrational mindset that develops from early childhood trauma, but they don't necessarily describe it. And so I wanted to be the one to actually describe it for those who didn't understand it.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The same person, this is more of a comment than a question, but it's a really great comment, so I want to read it, and it's directed to you, Dr. Wright. Um, Dr. Wright, you and the community you have created with CCS and those whom you work with and for is a beautiful example of making the world a better place each and every day. Creating a feeling of belonging is what we all strive for. Thank you for creating the opportunity for all of us to meet and learn from Erik beyond CCS's amazing initiatives and the upcoming incarcerated event and the like.
Thank you. Always love more of a comment than a question, but very kind. Sounds like I put somebody up to that, didn't it? Very nice. Thank you.
So I have another one for you, Erik. Can you talk about your process of finding the individuals you decided to speak for this book and the process of choosing which stories to include in the book?
Well, the process was simple. It was just listening to people's stories over the years and saying to myself, people have to hear this story. And so when I came up with the idea for the book and I pitched it to Kevin and he threw his support behind me, I already knew that kid would be the first chapter. You know, Kevin asked me who would be the first chapter. I said, kid. He said, great. That's what I would have chosen, you know. And so just from just listening to people's stories over the years made me already understand that this is the person whose story will be in the book. And the first six or seven stories were just like that. The people I interviewed. After seven, it was people I would meet, and they would ask me, what am I doing when they'd see me at my desk every day and all night writing. And they'd ask me, what am I doing? And I'd tell them about the imprisoned mind, and they'd share their stories, and some were hit and some were missed. You know, but the ones who hit, I knew that they had to be in it too. And I put them on my list. And as soon as I was done with the last chapter, I'd go and begin to interview them. And so it wasn't a hard process. But that's one thing that people in prison, they want to be heard. And so if you ask somebody a question about their life, they're going to tell you. But you have to be careful what you ask, because you just might get an answer that you're not prepared for. I'm just attuned to hearing pain and trauma because that's what my life has been, and I needed to give voice to those people on the inside who didn't have a voice of their own to share with others.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks. So I have a question that came in through the question and answer queue, and it's a little circular, but I think it gets at something that's worth talking about. So the question is phrased as, how does the environment affect our ability to heal enough to contribute to making the environment more of a positive one?
It's mental. The environment absolutely does affect the ability to heal. However, it's a mindset. And like any mindset, you can switch it. And if you have the drive and determination to change, you can separate yourself from this hostile environment and create a safety net for you to escape to and be able to build yourself up and develop yourself by separating yourself from the toxic environment that we live in.
And I have another question. This is almost a sort of a restatement of that question in a different way, and it deals with some different things. So I'm just going to read the question. To Kevin's point about wanting to change and prisons as a tool for exacting justice, this makes American prisons intentionally punishing to create the pain that makes one want to change. How can a prisoner overcome this kind of intention by recognizing their trauma, forgiving themselves, but while also seeing themselves in the trauma and the people around themselves in the trauma? Hope that makes sense.
That didn't really make sense. I'll try to answer that. I mean, the main thing is what you can't move beyond your trauma unless you first utilize introspection and understand what happened, who caused it, and how did it make you feel. You have to learn how to process your trauma, and that's what my class does. It teaches people how to process their traumas and gives them the tools to effectively move beyond those traumas and want to grow and put those things in their past. But like I said before, it's all mental. If you have the drive and determination to do that, you can mentally separate yourself from this toxic environment, and focus on self-development. I'm proof of that, and I have 100 guys who have graduated my class who are doing very well, extremely well, since graduating.
To offer some thoughts to that, we created this workshop that we do, and part of it is asking people in prison, how can the incarceration experience be thought of as an opportunity? And I remember the first time we were doing this workshop, I was really worried about actually asking people that, and I thought there'd be a lot of resistance. And we've done this workshop many, many times now, and almost everyone always has an answer. And they never just say like, there's no opportunity here or it can't be or anything like that. So we actually ask people on the inside, how can it be an opportunity? They say, well, there are opportunities, and here they are. And I remember the very first time I heard somebody say prison saved my life, I thought that person was really unique. And I was like, wow, like you must be the only person that this is the case for. And I've heard it so many times now, repeatedly, over and over, where people will say, prison actually saved my life. And we could talk about that alone for like 30 minutes right now, what that means or how to unpack that. But it says a lot about the lives that people lead prior to being in prison and the inability to stop, to reset, to think about what they need or what they want or anything like that. And the conclusion we've come to is we wish there were other opportunities besides prison for people to get to that point, right? That there are opportunities on the outside where they can think about that. But the question is a good one. Backing up to the previous one, physical environment, we've had an opportunity to create a more productive physical environment where Erik is to do the classes that we do down there, have it be trauma informed. And so you're starting to see this more borrowing from Scandinavian countries and other places that make it so it's less of a dominating steel bar presence kind of thing. there's also a greenhouse in that prison. It changes everything. There's a different feel about that where you might be able to a little bit relax and set prison aside for a moment and work on yourself or take a class or read or whatever it might be. And I'm of the opinion that our prisons should be more like that. If we want better outcomes, they should be places where people can better themselves. Incarcerating people is enough. Separating them from society is enough. It doesn't also have to be a really difficult, nasty environment that they're kept in.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to combine two here. These are kind of both for you, Erik. The first part is someone is asking, have the CEOs you work with daily read your book? And they wrote, I hope so. And if so, how has it changed your daily interactions?
I've had CEOs ask about my book. I've had CEOs say that they were going to buy the book, but I've never encountered a CEO who said they bought it. There are staff here who, when Kevin and I had the book launch here at the prison, there were staff who were given free copies of it. I don't know if they've read it. If they have, they haven't mentioned it, but it's definitely a conversation piece when we do talk about the book.
That's amazing that you can even talk to them about it, even if they haven't read it. The other question, sort of related, and you mentioned the 100 graduates, which is an incredible accomplishment. Do you have some sort of, what types of positive effects can you discuss that you've seen in these 100 graduates? How has this impacted them and improved their lives?
Well, just in my last class, I had a guy who he was on meth with his son, and he was cleaning a gun, and his gun had an accidental discharge, and he killed his own 21-year-old son. And in prison, he was filled with shame, to the point where he was doing drugs. He was being disciplined by his own race of people because of his behaviors. And today, after taking the class, he is a complete 180. He's full of life. He smiles all the time. He's not doing drugs. He goes to NA classes. He just bragged to me this morning that he's now graduated 3 different courses and has 3 certificates, and he hasn't had a certificate since he was a child, and he's a 50-year-old man. This is the type of success story that I would love to have 25 times out of 25 times in each class. Unfortunately, because the imprisoned mind is an irrational mindset, it takes a lot of work to conquer. And so right now, my graduation rates are 50%. So out of 25 people, I may get 12 or 13 guys graduate my class. And it's for a multitude of reasons that they don't stick with it. But out of 25 people, this is the byproduct of being able to conquer your imprisoned mind. And if we have 2,000 people on this unit, and if I can get to all of them to take my class, a 50% graduation rate would mean 1,000 of them would be like this guy I just spoke about. That would substantially drop the drug use rates. The program rates would skyrocket. Unfortunately, I can only have 25 people in my class and at a time, and I'm working at it.
We have a couple people asking questions, and I'm sure you've both heard this before. Why aren't we seeing more trauma-informed care in the K-12 setting so that it's not as needed at this sort of later stage when it's so much more, when things are so much, more impactful and really affecting people's lives? Do you think that there's a scenario in which this sort of education could be shared more widely in K-12 and there'll be less need for it at your prison, Erik or Kevin? What do you think about that?
I believe there needs to be. We write in the solutions part of the book about the very first time you can recognize that a child has been traumatized is in grade school. Their behavior demonstrates that they've been through something, and oftentimes they act out in school. They get in fights. They talk back to their teachers, and what happens is they punish the kid instead of listen to the kid and try to understand what they're going through. And so if schools had a more trauma-focused approach, we would do less punishment in schools and more listening and treatment so that we can prevent the development of the imprisoned mind and save future victims and this individual's life from future of incarceration.
Yeah, my answer is also yes. To one of Shannon's questions earlier to Erik was about the audience for the book. And one of the most gratifying to me has been educators, and especially K through 12 educators that have read this book and reached out and said, these are my kids, and like put words to the experiences that they have. And so recognizing that teachers can play this role. If you've read this book, you can see different spots where teachers and mentors were making a difference. And it's often the case that people were one mentor or teacher away from a very different life. And so it's been gratifying to me because we typically work on the back end in the prison system. And almost anytime we give a community talk, it's like, how do you do it earlier? Like, how do you get these programs before people ever end up there? And I think by virtue of just reading this book, of putting words to the stories that people were experiencing, have teachers reading it, having their students reading it. I know some groups have done book circles around this book. Just having those conversations and really recognizing the roles that teachers can play, and quite frankly, the unfair expectations that are placed on them as teachers dealing with this. I think there's immense opportunity there to have trauma-informed education. That's not my world. I don't know to what extent they are or not doing it, but I hope so. Great question.
I think Matt has one more.
Yeah, we've got more than one more, but we're nearing the end of our time. So I think people have a lot that are really interested. This has been an amazing presentation. Thank you both so much. Someone just asked if either of you have thoughts about, let me find it again, about housing first initiatives. Is that something that is familiar to either of you? I don't have a lot of context with this question, but just wanted to ask that.
Not familiar to me.
I mean, I can just go off the words and assuming it's, start with people's housing when they're released, and the rest will follow. And I know we had an opportunity to evaluate a voucher program in the state a few years ago where people were provided vouchers to basically be rent free for the first few months. And if that's the question, and I don't want to go too far down the wrong road, if it's not, it takes a major challenge off of people's plates as they're trying to re-enter to society so they can focus on some of the other things. And so I think it's a good thing, again, if that's what's meant by housing first. Erik, hearing that, anything if that is the true thing?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to say thank you before Chad closes this out. It was really nice to meet both of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to
thank you
with us.
Thanks for having us. It was our pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. So ASU Library would like to extend a big thank you again to Erik Maloney, Kevin Wright, and Shannon Nickel for bringing their energy, enthusiasm, and expertise to today's event. We would also like to thank you, the audience, for attending. Today's event has been recorded, and a Zoom recording will be sent to everyone who is registered. So thank you all so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, Erik. You were great, man.
Thanks, man. You too.
Appreciate
I like the coat.
Yeah. I like your lanyard.
Thanks, man.